другое дело совсем. Я думаю, мы можем начинать. Как раз у нас не так много докладов, мягко говоря, и очень хорошо, потому что есть возможность развернуться докладчиком. Стало быть, первый доклад Питер Грегори Новинский, Лос-Анджелес. I appended to my beloved, by my beloved head will drown, the anthropological foundations of Prince Myshkin Flower in Idiot, please.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. I'll be presenting in English today, so I'll try to speak relatively slowly, and if I'm going too fast, please feel free to give me a high sign. Thank you. So, when Prince Myshkin first meets the Apanshians, having seen the portrait of Nastasia Filipovna at the beginning of Idiot, he declares that, quote, beauty is difficult to judge. I'm not prepared yet. Beauty is a riddle. Throughout the novel, his inability to either relate to the call of beauty or reject the passive adoration that non-beauty presents leads him and those around him to solipsism, mental infirmities, and eventually death. In a novel bold enough to utter the words, beauty will save the world, this inability to act in the face of beauty is revealed as a fatal flaw. But where does this inability stem from? How do Aglaya Ivanovna and Nastasia Filipovna, as symbolic representations of beauty, expose this anthropological problem? As an anthropological problem, excuse me. And what does it signify about Dostoevsky's perception of the human person? To answer these questions, we must look to the composition of the protagonists and how his failure will lead to his creator to a greater understanding of the person as a hero later in his works. In my work, I study the inhabitants of Dostoevsky's late novels as persons rather than characters in the literary context. This stems from Sergei Askolbov and Mikhail Bakhtin's studies and is modified through the lens of Orthodox personalism. A literary person, in this respect, is considered to be made in the likeness of their creator in the following four ways. First, they are distinguished from a typical realist character insofar as they contain ideological freedom from the constraints of the author's worldview. Second, they are granted a physical freedom from the natural and biological demands of the world they inhabit. Third, they are a unique subject created with a deep and distinctive psychological and historical eye. And fourth, they enter into a dialogical and physical relationship with others who are equal in their personal depth. While Myshkin seems to fulfill these criterion, his conception as the, quote, perfectly beautiful person, as Dostoevsky called him in a letter to Maikov, does not allow him to relate functionally with other persons. His inability to understand and relate with beauty are signs of a fundamental personological problem. According to the notebooks for the novel, Dostoevsky originally planned to wrench the perfectly beautiful from a deeply flawed idiot. When this changes to the new form, less than a month before the publication of the first chapter, it immediately annihilates the possibility of Myshkin as a savior, as well as doing Dostoevsky's attempt to positively depict a fully beautiful person. This is, to a large extent, caused by Myshkin's relation to the character type of a sentimental dreamer or of a fool. A holy fool, Dostoevsky's conception of the person, as disclosed in his artistic output, is dependent on the ontological proposition that human being manifests itself through relation. In the Orthodox personalist perspective, divine being is disclosed by the communion between the three persons of the Godhead, sharing a single essence. The mode of this divine being, therefore, is love. Similarly, human persons act according to the image and likeness of their creator. They are, however, able to choose to act more or less in the mode of divine being, i.e., with more or less love toward others of like essence. If we then take the definition of the literary person, as I've stated above, and consider it in the light of the understanding of the personalist conception, we find three primary categories of the person: freedom, love, and uniqueness. These, then, reveal the primacy of relation to the mode of being in the following manner. For a person to be free, they must be unbound by the predetermination of their creator, of their natural urges, or the oppression of their fellow persons. For a person to love, they must abandon themselves to the object of their love. For a person to be unique, they must encounter the other, a person of similar nature who is unique in their own way. Each of these principles requires another to whom they either move closer towards or further from, and each must be dynamic. This dynamism is a trait of which Mishkin is essentially devoid. This lack is made apparent in his encounters with beauty. Beauty, as I will show, is the key to relation. On the one hand, as Christos Yanaris indicates, beauty is, quote, a summons to that relation and community which promises the abundance of life. It summons beauty to the longed-for, life-giving participation, to the transcendence of death. Beauty is simultaneously that, end quote, beauty is simultaneously that which calls a person into relation with another as charm, and also that which most vividly expresses one's own personal uniqueness. This invitation to being, therefore, can lead to the, quote, transcendence of death, insofar as it calls a person toward authentic being. Beauty, therefore, has a soteriological component. It invites a person to lay aside all earthly cares and to love one's neighbor. It empties a person to the other, leading them towards salvation. On the other hand, non-beauty can masquerade itself as beauty. This concealment is what Mitya Karamazov referred to in Bratya Karamazovi as the beauty of Sodom. It is the mode of love of persons after the fall, the natural urge of attractions that is not only not dependent on reciprocity, but actively seeks to subjugate the other, to strip them of their personhood and isolate the subject. This natural desire for beauty as lust is a summons to death. It is the experience of these two manifestations of beauty and non-beauty that confound Mishkin. And do we not find it ironic that the model for the perfectly beautiful person cannot himself realize that beauty is not simply to be judged, but to be reacted to? By making Mishkin a perfectly beautiful person, Dostoevsky has involuntarily made him incapable of fullness of love and movement towards authentic being. I quote Yanaris again, who posits that, quote, a proven morality, an acknowledged spirituality, an unblemished reputation, end quote, leads not to love, but to pity and solipsism. Tragically, Mishkin is unable to love because he is already perfect. There is nothing he needs from a relationship, and therefore he is incapable of offering that which the other truly needs, a full and active self-emptying love. His dreams of an active life while in Switzerland do not come to fruition. In a typically sentimental passage early in the novel, he recalls that, quote, I kept thinking about how I was going to live. I wanted to test my fate. I became reckless, especially at certain moments. You know there are such moments, especially in solitude, end quote. But his dream of life out from under the mountains and waterfalls of Switzerland were not to be. He maintains aspects of the role of the sentimental dreamer, even while attempting to live in St. Petersburg. And with this in mind, we can see the development of his relationships with Nastasia Filipovna and Aglaya Ivanovna, and how they are parallel to his relationships with the destitute Marie and the children in Switzerland. He was not in love with Marie, but rather, quote, never regarded her as guilty, but only as unfortunate. This is just as he will view and eventually come to pity Nastasia Filipovna. As for the children, he notes that they, quote, can be told everything, and called them little birds, because nothing in the world is better than a little bird. This is precisely how his relationship with Aglaya Ivanovna proceeds. Neither she nor the children are persons, but free creatures who do not sow or reap or stow away in barns. When he moves from the pastoral Swiss landscape into the city, this role changes slightly. As Rogozhin notes at the end of their meeting on the train in the beginning of the novel, Mishkin appears to people as a holy fool, as one whose simplicity and clarity immediately know what each person requires, and he advises them on this. While those in fraternal relations with him regard him as a holy fool, Aglaya Ivanovna and Nastasia Filipovna relate to him in the role of a sentimental dreamer. Let's turn to look at these two relationships now and begin with Aglaya Ivanovna. Throughout his oeuvre, Dostoevsky speaks of the purity and beauty of children, the terror of their abuse, and their ability to overlook and avoid the passions that adults suffer. Although children act brazenly against others in the text, they eventually learn from a wise elder. Alyosha Karamazov comes to mind as the primary example of this. They seem to be planted to be grown by Dostoevsky to eventually become dynamic, but are not yet full persons in their innocence. Aglaya Ivanovna expresses this childlike beauty, especially in its rambunctiousness, throughout the novel. She would become twice as pretty, quote, in each of her wrathful outbursts, and despite all her ostensible seriousness and implacability, there showed so much that was still childish, impatiently schoolgirlish, and poorly concealed, that it was sometimes quite impossible to look at her without laughing. Laughing, we know, is a mark of this agapic love in Dostoevsky's oeuvre. While this is deeply ingrained in her in general, it blossoms most fully when she is around Myshkin. Specifically, this occurs in the incidents surrounding the poor knight, the duel, and their engagement. The engagement between Myshkin and Aglaya Ivanovna. Her beauty charms the prince, and she calls him into a relationship. He does, in fact, fall in love with her, even if only passively. But her love is not free from demands, and he is incapable of fulfilling that which she needs. She sees the poor knight in the prince, and insists on that this sentimental character break free of his chains in order to save her. Aglaya Ivanovna asks him, quote, "Why do you humiliate yourself and place yourself lower than everyone else? Why have you twisted everything in yourself? Why is there no pride in you?" She craves the beautiful in the prince, but she seeks to dominate it, to force the passions on him, to make him a real person, and not the laughable, sentimental caricature that he seems to be. Myshkin, in his turn, judges Aglaya Ivanovna's beauty rather than acting upon it. His perception only allows him to answer to her beauty in a specific way, and forces it upon her. He treats her like the child that she is. There is no room for a mutual or relational love between the two, despite the beauty emanating from and acting upon each of them. Aglaya is in love with a dreamer, and this is what she receives. Unfortunately, it is not enough for her, and it drives her away from Myshkin, and away from her family, into the arms of a lying, foreign, and worst of all in Dostoevsky's conception, Catholic count, who brings her to her room. Again? Good. Sorry about that. Let us now turn to Nastasia Filipovna. As Myshkin I'm just gonna... Can you hear? Can everyone hear me?
Yeah, we can.
Okay, thank you. Hopefully that doesn't happen again, I apologize. Let us now turn to Nastasia Filipovna. As Myshkin relates, her face is, quote, extraordinary for its beauty and for something else, a boundless pride and contempt, almost hatred, and at the same time something trusting, something surprisingly simple. The contrast even seemed to awaken some sort of compassion. That dazzling beauty was even unbearable, the beauty of the pale face, the nearly hollow cheeks, and burning eyes. Strange beauty. If Aglaya Ivanovna's beauty is that of innocent and free children, then Nastasia Filipovna's is one that develops from those horrific suffering shown in Dostoevsky's oeuvre. Her torment at the hands of Trotsky forged her into this stunning, alluring, and devastating woman who gathers flocks of men around her wherever she goes. Her beauty, however, turns to non-beauty when she exploits it to satisfy her ego, when it turns into a weapon of vengeance. To Rogozhin, Gania Rilonovich, Trotsky, Lebedev, and so on, her beauty is a siren song. At its end is not the fulfillment of personal relation, but the cold, stony grip of death. The lustful insistence of either the masked, beautiful person or the one craving their beauty does not seek reciprocity in a relationship, but rather their own gratification in the passions. Nastasia Filipovna points to this when she realizes that Gania could, quote, kill for money, and is so possessed by this lust now, so worked up about money, it's as if he's lost his mind, end quote. Myshkin is also aware of this aspect of non-beauty, but is unable to avoid its temptation. He believes that it is a natural part of a woman's love, and not a perversion of general beauty. Later in the novel, he tells Rogozhin, quote, "Do you know that a woman is capable of torturing a man with her cruelties and mockeries, and will not feel remorse even once, because she thinks every time she looks at you, now I'll torture him to death, but later I'll make it up to him with love?" Dominance in Myshkin's perspectives seems to be a natural aspect of beauty and love. This will continue to be a motif throughout the novel and torment him as well. In a similar manner to his reaction to the Swiss Marie, however, Myshkin never perceives any sinfulness in Nastasia Filipovna's actions. Here we look to Nastasia Filipovna's reaction to Myshkin's beauty, one that inherently contradicts Myshkin's reaction to her. Through this perception, the flaw in his person can finally come into focus. The beauty of his purity causes the mask of her non-beauty to dissolve. The veil comes off, if only momentarily, from her own eyes. She becomes guilty before him because his words seem so beautiful, so pure. I quote at length here from just before Nastasia Filipovna cast the bundle of money into the fire because of the utmost importance of the echoes of Myshkin's swish dreams in her words. Quote, "No, better let's part nicely, because I am a dreamer myself. as if I hadn't dreamed of you. You're right about that. I dreamed for a long time, completely alone, and I kept imagining someone like you, kind, honest, good, and as silly as you are, who'd suddenly come and say, you're not guilty. And then one like Totsky would come, and I would drown myself in the pond. She sees the sentimental dreamer in herself and in Myshkin, and knows it cannot amount to anything beyond the reality in which she lives. Myshkin, precisely according to her dreams, therefore, fails to react to Nastasia Philippovna's beauty. While he became the wise elder to Aglaya Ivanovna, he becomes a completely passive object of unconditional acceptance to Nastasia. At every turn, he is to her like Rogozhin on his knees, even though he is not guilty before her in any way. And it is well known how this proud beauty responds to repentance. I need not go into it here. When Myshkin offers, and also when he attempts to marry her later in the novel, he pledges to take care of her, but he is unable to do this. He is unable to care for anyone beyond these mere gestures that he makes that allude to acting in a self-emptying and loving manner. As everyone around him constantly reminds him, he is incapable of caring for himself, physically or spiritually. How then can he care for another person? This inability is caused, this flaw is caused by his inability to choose, the flaw created in his person by the boundaries of perfection. This impotence in Myshkin is exposed in the denouement between the four heroes of the novel, as Dostoevsky called Nastasia Philippovna, Aglaya Ivanovna, Rogozhin, and Myshkin in the same letter to Maikov. When the dark beauty offers Myshkin a choice between herself and Aglaya Ivanovna, instead of taking action, he tells Aglaya, surely this isn't possible. She, Nastasia, is so unhappy. His passivity is manna for the darkness of the non-beauty that consumes Nastasia Philippovna. Myshkin is completely submissive, completely dominated by the solipsistic ego, and he's even aware of this. He tells Evgeny Pavlovich before the wedding that he is not marrying her to make her happy, but rather, quote, I'm simply getting married. She wants it. And so what if I'm getting married? Well, it makes no difference. Only she would have died. This is not love. Love requires suddenness, ecstatic joy. Coming back to Yanaris, we are reminded that, quote, marriage and love are rival realities, a fixed institution and a free dynamic of life. The institution defines and defends the general, the impersonal, the objective, and fixes life in stable definitions. If marriage is fixed, love necessarily must happen on a sudden. And as Viktor Shklovsky notes, suddenly is an important word, and one of Dostoevsky's most beloved. It is an introduction of a new force, new qualities, and new proposals. Suddenly is a discovery, and should have been placed at the entrance of the Temple of Art, refuting the inscription above the Inferno. This suddenness reveals the unique and absolute value of the other as a subject, and yet the suddenness of beauty and love are completely absent in Myshkin. His attempted marriage is an affront to the uniqueness of the persons of Aglaya Ivanovna, Nastasia Philippovna, and Rogozhin, and himself. There is nothing ecstatic, sudden, hopeful, free, unique, or self-emptying in this quote-unquote love. In a way, it's for the best that Rogozhin frees Myshkin and Nastasia Philippovna from its chains. Myshkin has again made a judgment of beauty, but does not act, nor does he recognize the ability to disclose the unique expression of being in another person through beauty. He expresses his obliviousness to the transcendent power of beauty when, just before Rogozhin steals his bride-to-be, he tells Evgeny Pavlovich, if only Aglaya, if only Aglaya knew everything, because here you have to know everything. Why can we never know everything about another person when it's necessary, when the person is to blame? Rather than the ecstasy of movement towards authentic being, he focuses on the knowledge of another person. It is this intellectualization of the other that prevents the dissolution of the boundaries between two persons, the disclosing of the person and the mode of being in relation. Myshkin, rather, is relying on his philosophy. He is without the ability to act freely and to give love. He is, despite his own protestations, impotent. He is incapable of choice. And in this way he is less of a person, due to the choice of his creator to constrict him within the boundaries of the perfectly beautiful. The perfectly beautiful person, therefore, is impossible, or at least it must be a failure in the world of the realist novel, and even more so in Dostoevsky's higher realism. In the end, Myshkin's attempts to save Nastasia Philippovna, Aglaya Ivanovna, and Rogozhin fails because he is bound to act in a mode that is foreign to human being. according to Dostoevsky. He is constantly forced to be kind, compassionate, and forgiving, but he is also forced to be naive, inert, and unresponsive. Dostoevsky has made him less of a person and more of a type by taking his ability to choose and act from him. During the first meeting with Yaponchins, Michigan states, "Perhaps I really am a philosopher, and who knows, maybe I actually do have a thought of teaching." Gregory Palamas, the great theologian of hesychasm, opens his work The Triads with the epigraph, "Philosophy does not save," and this is a very fitting reminder for Dostoevsky's works. The attempt to depict a beautiful person in the guise of the prince philosopher fails utterly. Rogozhin murders Nastasia Filipovna and is sent to prison, Myshkin returns to a state of complete mental idiocy, and Aglaya Ivanovna suffers in a foreign land, all because the hero was not created free. In a way, Myshkin is a reflection of the painting of Christ in the tomb by Hans Holbein in the Rogozhin family home. To represent the perfectly beautiful in a realist literary or painterly mode, it seems that the artist must highlight the physical impurity of the subject. Therefore, perhaps we can say, in parody of his own words, Myshkin is enough to destroy one's faith in the perfectly beautiful person. What we see in Dostoevsky's subsequent output, however, is a rejection of this inherent anthropological flaw. In his Plan for the Life of a Great Sinner, Dostoevsky depicts the prince who becomes Stavrogin as a person who constantly chooses not to act because of his previous sins. It is a deliberate counter-distinction to Myshkin, but explicitly shows the dangers of the person who ignores their ability to act and to be free. But the failure of Myshkin also leads to the author's ultimate literary triumph, his depiction of Alyosha Karamazov. Alyosha's path to becoming Dostoevsky's hero is predicated on his battle with the passions caused by his failure to accept the stinking corpse of his elder. And yet we see him trample down his passions over a course of actions that is consistent with a hesychastic mode of being, of making the free choice of the metanoia turn towards divine being. I've spoken about Alyosha's moment of metanoia at Grushenka's and his subsequent noetic vision of the wedding at Cana elsewhere, and can't elaborate on it here, but it is due to Dostoevsky's failure in depicting Myshkin as a perfectly beautiful person that he is able to portray Alyosha's continual struggle toward the beauty of Christ. It is this struggle that allows him to begin the process of salvation for those around him, a step that Myshkin could not take. In conclusion, we learn from Idiot that there is no possibility of perfection in the human person in this life. It is at best a self-delusion or incomplete understanding projected onto another, or, significantly worse, a corruption of the person's mode of being that leads to solipsism, madness, and death. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Now, questions, please. No questions? Thank you very much. Тогда следующий докладчик